In today's video, we will explain why some Puerto Rican children were sent to boarding schools intended for Native American children in the United States, and what the purpose was behind creating these institutions for Native peoples. The government of the United States believed that Native American cultures had to disappear in order to, and I quote them, civilize indigenous peoples and integrate them into U.S. society. Their goal was to destroy native languages, spiritual traditions, tribal systems of governance, communal relationships to the land, and the family structures of Native American communities. The colonizers sought to impose Christianity, the English language, European gender roles, private property with land taxes, and complete obedience to the federal government. Forced assimilation was considered cheaper and more politically convenient than continuing the wars against indigenous peoples, who were still resisting after decades of conflict. They believed that if indigenous children's identities were erased, they could eventually take control of their territories without facing resistance. With this ideology, a system of boarding schools funded by the federal government and run by churches across the United States was established. These boarding schools for indigenous children became the cornerstone of a forced assimilation policy that lasted nearly 200 years. From the mid-19th to the mid-20th century, more than 500 schools received federal funding and were administered primarily by Christian institutions. At their peak, 60,000 indigenous children were confined at the same time under this purpose. By 1926, 83% of all school-aged indigenous children were enrolled in indigenous boarding institutions. The motto of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, founded in 1879 by Richard Henry Pratt, captured its purpose: kill the Indian and save the man. The schools operated like military bases. Children, many as young as 4 or 5 years old, were taken by force, escorted by soldiers, and forced to walk long distances until they reached the boarding institutions. Their hair was cut, their names were changed without parental consent. Their traditional clothing was taken away, and they were strictly forbidden from speaking their ancestral languages, practicing their religious beliefs, or communicating with their families. The curriculum focused on manual labor such as agriculture, carpentry, and blacksmithing for the boys, and sewing and domestic duties for the girls, while eliminating any philosophical, scientific, historical, or indigenous knowledge. Punishments for preserving their language or culture included beatings, isolation, and the withholding of food. This program caused massive intergenerational trauma by banning the use of indigenous languages and separating children from their families. Often without telling parents where they have taken the children, it created a profound rupture that continues to impact Native communities today. These children were treated as orphans even though they had families, and many parents never saw them again. It is estimated that more than 100 languages disappeared or are now on the brink of extinction, and those that still survive do so only in part thanks to current tribal revitalization efforts. A federal investigation in 2022 documented at least 973 deaths of children between 1819 and 1969 in these schools, for multiple causes ranging from diseases to physical abuse, alleged accidents that were never investigated, malnutrition, and tuberculosis. Many graves remain unmarked because the parents, who also did not speak English, were never informed of what happened. The deliberate destruction of the spiritual, linguistic, and social heritage of hundreds of Native American tribes in the United States has been recognized by the United Nations as a form of modern cultural genocide. The last federally run boarding school closed in 1978 Kennecott Indian School in Illinois. In 2024, President Joe Biden offered a historic apology to the indigenous communities affected. He acknowledged that the boarding school, which operated for more than 150 years and caused at least 973 documented child deaths, was a sin on our soul and a blot on American history. But an apology without real reparations does not repair the harm that has been done for hundreds of years, nor does it eliminate the laws that were created to take away their lands and rights. The few laws that protect indigenous nations remain fragile and can be eliminated depending on who is in power. Native Americans are the original owners of the land in the United States and throughout the entire American continent. Yet ironically, they were not recognized as U.S. citizens until 1929. In other words, it was people who came from Europe who established a legal system to determine who could be recognized as an American citizen in the Americas. Think about it. Really think about it. For the peoples who have lived on these lands for thousands of years before their arrival, it is absurd that others would attempt to decide their identity and legitimacy. European colonization and the forced assimilation policies implemented by the United States government caused profound cultural and emotional harm to indigenous peoples. Many survivors and their descendants continue to face the consequences of that trauma, working today on processes of healing, language revitalization, recovery of ancestral knowledge, and the strengthening of their community identities. Apologies to Native Americans without reparations are an insult to those who lost their childhood, their families, and their identity due to state-inflicted violence. This same model of forced assimilation was applied in Puerto Rico after the invasion of the United States, although with a particular purpose. Between 1898 and 1980, at least 193 Puerto Rican children were sent to the Carlisle School. Although detailed records exist for only about 100 of them, 30 children were taken to the Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute, and another 15 to the Tuskegee Institute. In total, fewer than 300 students participated in this system, as far as we know so far. It's difficult to determine because the research is still ongoing and new names and details continue to emerge each year. The first to arrive at Carlisle were Juan Santano and Jose Hierro in 1899. A group traveled in 1901 with 37 young people from San Juan, Ponce, and Mia. Most were between 12 and 18 years old. Some were orphans from the San Ciriaco hurricane of 1899, while others came from well-off families. Martin G. Brimbaugh, Commissioner of Education in Puerto Rico, and Richard Pratt, Superintendent of the Carlisle School, adapted the program for Puerto Rico with the purpose of creating a loyal Puerto Rican elite class aligned with U.S. colonial power, trained to be integrated as skilled labor into the sugar industry under the control of American corporations. For that reason, the children sent to these schools were not the sons of jibaros from the mountains or families living in poverty, but rather coastal youth from wealthy families, along with children orphaned by the San Ciriaco hurricane. During the administration of George R. Colton, the fictional category of the tribe of Puerto Rico was created in order to legally justify sending these students to boarding schools that had been established for indigenous peoples. Puerto Rican youth were subjected to the same brutal treatment as indigenous children on the mainland: haircutting, name changes, and the prohibition of speaking Spanish, forced religious conversion, and manual labor through the outing system, which was equivalent to child slavery. The families who managed to visit them were horrified by the way they were being treated. 5 students escaped, and 11 were withdrawn after their parents pleaded for their return. Afro-descendant students faced even harsher discrimination, since racism based on skin color was deeply rooted in the United States. Black people were not considered human beings, nor granted legal rights. Many young people returned sick or with severe physical and psychological consequences from what they experienced. To this day, it is still unknown exactly how many Puerto Rican children, including jibaros and orphans, was sent in total to these boarding schools during the early decades of the colonial period. A thorough study of the records from the more than 500 schools would be necessary to obtain an accurate number, since the government of Puerto Rico never kept complete documentation of how many kids were sent to the United States. In Puerto Rico, massive indigenous boarding schools were not established as in the United States, because by 1898, despite the fact that the U.S. government itself had documented the presence of native peoples on the island and was fully aware of their existence, it decided to officially declare that the Taino people were extinct. The Spanish had already declared them gone since the 16th century, and the United States chose to continue that narrative because it was convenient for carrying out the cultural assimilation of the island without facing international resistance. Today, Taino DNA is present in more than 60% of the Puerto Rican population. Although there was a strong anti-colonial and pro-independence political organization in the countryside, it was not recognized as an indigenous movement, but rather as a Puerto Rican national movement that needed to be controlled. Another reason why boarding schools were not established on the island was the opposition of the Catholic Church. These institutions were run by Protestant churches and the military, and the Catholic Church argued that Puerto Rico was a Catholic nation and that its citizens should not be forced to adopt Protestant religions. Many people joined these protests. The assimilation of Puerto Ricans was carried out through the public school system, the prohibition of Spanish as the language of instruction, the imposition of curricula centered on European and U.S. history, and the banning of any Puerto Rican national symbols. The United States could not empty an entire island to send its population to boarding schools, so it decided to turn all of Puerto Rico schools into tools of cultural assimilation. As a result, a generation of Puerto Ricans came to align themselves with U.S. authority, enabling continued colonial control of the island with little resistance. Mandatory education encouraged many young people to distance themselves from their Native American Taino heritage and become assimilated into U.S. culture. There, our children were taught the false idea that the Taino had disappeared centuries ago and that the Jabaro was simply a white rural man. However, in reality, the Jabaro descends directly from the Taino who sought refuge in the mountains to avoid being killed or enslaved by the Spaniards. Today, thanks to the internet and the digitization of historical records, we know that the governments of Spain, the United States, and Puerto Rico were always aware of the presence of native peoples on the island. Instead of protecting them, these governments actively pursued policies of assimilation and cultural erasure from the moment of invasion. Acknowledging and remembering this history is not optional. It is essential to preventing the repetition of this form of cultural genocide. As long as the world forgets or softens what happened in these boarding schools to these children, governments will have a blank check to commit this crime again. The mass kidnapping of children, the prohibition of their original language, the banning of their rituals, the unmarked graves, the slavery disguised as outing, the racist classification of Puerto Ricans as the tribe of Puerto Rico. Governments will continue to believe they can repeat these acts against any people they consider uncivilized if we keep silence, because there is already a precedent set. Therefore, the cultural assimilation of Puerto Ricans was carried out primarily through the public school system. Silence is what allows atrocities to be repeated. Only by naming precisely how they tried to erase us, banning our language, cutting our hair, separating children from their families, changing their names, turning them into labor, can we create laws that will punish any future attempt to do the same. The Indian Child Welfare Act of 1970, the Native American Languages Act of 1990, and current language revitalization programs exist because the truth was exposed and society reacted with outrage, not because the government suddenly decided to be benevolent. That is why human rights must be demanded. Governments do not protect them until it is already too late. We Puerto Ricans have the responsibility to reclaim our Taino culture. We also have the duty to study, legislate, and implement revitalization programs to ensure that our culture is not lost. Today, we are facing a serious issue. Unscrupulous individuals are stealing Taino petroglyphs from Puerto Rico and selling them on the black market, stripping the island of its ancestral heritage. This alarming situation was revealed thanks to a young archaeology student who exposed it on social media. You can watch the full video on her TikTok account at soymerlienpr_. The government of Puerto Rico must recognize our Taino heritage and begin developing programs that genuinely protect it. Protection does not mean restricting people from accessing their own cultural heritage, as so often happens, simply putting up a gate and a sign that blocks entry to ancestral sites. Protecting it means strictly penalizing those who steal or destroy our cultural heritage. It means investing in education, museums, revitalization of cultural traditions, archaeology, the restoration of parks, and the protection of sacred sites, so that what we have today can be enjoyed by future generations. Today, in the United States and Canada, Indigenous women and girls disappear and are killed at rates far higher than any other demographic group. According to data from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the United States Department of Justice for 2023 to 2024, more than 80% of Native women have experienced violence in their lifetime, and thousands are listed as missing without most cases receiving national media attention or being solved. This emergency is known as Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, a crisis which the United Nations has described as genocide. Yet national agencies rarely find the perpetrators, and television media does not cover these stories either, reflecting the racism against Native Americans in the United States. This problem does not belong solely to the past. The historical debt remains unresolved, and indifference continues to take lives to this day. It is essential to have political leaders with dignity and determination who assume the responsibility of protecting Native peoples and safeguarding our nation's cultural heritage, both tangible and intangible. Let us remember that most Puerto Rican women are Native American women. Protecting them ensures the continuity of Taino DNA in future generations, for it has endured for centuries and remains alive today. Until next time, because the Taino people are still here. If you enjoyed this video, follow us to learn more about Puerto Rican history.